Make up mind. Fight.
As I am recording this, I am a 26-year-old man. I have played a lot of legitimately terrifying video games in my day, watched a lot of legitimately terrifying movies, and I like to think have had my fair share of legitimately terrifying real-world experiences. I would hopefully like to imagine myself as someone who is beyond the age of being frightened by anything in Nintendo games. Being scared by video games at all as an adult is something that I know some people would be deeply embarrassed to admit, so doubling that to being scared by what are effectively children's games would most certainly be beyond the realm of possibility for most people. I made a video about moments in video games that scared me as a kid, but that was kid me. Surely I'm not frightened in anything in a Nintendo game as an adult, right? Well, that's the funny thing. Chalk it up to my various anxiety disorders, their associated phobias, or just some unchecked mental health hangups, but I can actually name at least 5 things from Nintendo games that I played or replayed for the first time in my 20s that still managed to wring some degree of a fear response out of me. Not the type of fear response of like being up at night or anything, but rather that lingering uncomfortability that you experience when looking at something that you know troubles you. In this video, I want to discuss 5 bosses in Nintendo games that still managed to, at the very least, creep me out as an adult. The main defining factor here is that these are bosses that entered my radar when I was above the reasonable age to be frightened by them. These are not childhood trauma bosses, but rather adulthood anxiety bosses. One thing I want to stress is that if you find nothing I discuss in this video to be scary or creepy, and view me as just the biggest PAB man-child in the world for being creeped out by them, then that's entirely within your right to do so, just like how it's entirely within my right to be balls deep in your mom while you watch this. All that said, let's dive in. So, funny story about me. Despite being a certified Nintendrone for most of my life, I've always been fairly out on the Legend of Zelda series. I like it and especially respect it plenty, and it'd be stupid of me not to. But compared to some other core franchises from both Nintendo and other gaming companies, Zelda has always been pretty low-key for me in my life personally. I've beaten Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, the 3DS 4 Swords re-release that they gave out for free, and for some reason, the NES original. What's funny is that all but 4 Swords I beat for the first time in the past 5 years or so. Zelda really did pass me by as a kid. But when we're talking about quote-unquote scary content in Zelda games, of the 4 that I've beaten, I feel like Ocarina of Time is the common choice for most people. Between Redeads, the Shadow Temple, and most notably the Dead Hand, either this, Twilight Princess, or Majora's Mask seem to be most people's immediate picks for the Zelda games that frighten them the most. So naturally, my pick is from Wind Waker. Yeah, the Zelda game, infamously known for its cartoony art style, causing a ton of very stupid and poorly aged backlash at the time of its reveal, is the one that managed to legitimately creep me out when I was in my 20s. What's funny too, is that I've legitimately never seen someone say that this specific boss managed to upset them in the way that it did for me. It was purely an opal response. In the final few hours of Wind Waker, the player, as Toon Link, will be taking the fight directly to series antagonist Ganon's tower, having used their recently obtained Master Sword to cleave through a previously impenetrable dark barrier, and taking on all manner of staple Zelda enemies and creatures. Included in this lengthy gauntlet are rematches against most of the game's previous bosses, a battle against Phantom Ganon, and an extended maze puzzle sequence that almost assuredly would have asked of a walkthrough of me had I played the game for the first time as a kid. It's not until the player reaches the room that Ganon and his prisoner Zelda are held up in that things really kick off proper. The player enters the flooded chamber to find a sleeping Zelda, with Ganon creepily lingering over her, and the Mad King gives a brief but pointed diatribe about how the flooded Hyrule that the game is set in was a direct result of an attempt by the gods to destroy the kingdom for the people's transgressions. He then asks Link to give him a good fight and not betray his expectations before transforming into our first entry for this list. Yeah, Puppet Ganon gave me real bad vibes when I first played through Wind Waker a few years ago. And again, I want to stress, this was 20-plus-year-old adult me playing on the Wii U, and not childhood me playing on the GameCube. Something about this battle just registered in my brain as being thoroughly, deeply wrong. The music was definitely the first thing I noticed. It's this driving, intense, thumping boss track that sounds somewhat typical of Wind Waker's ordinary boss themes, yet with a mocking tone and its intensity ratcheted up to a level that almost makes its notes resemble horror stingers. This, combined with the way the boss moved, with it shuffling around its large frame and almost tauntingly dancing throughout the arena, just created this cacophony of visual and audio unpleasantness that reverberated throughout my soul. It, like, almost activated my fight or flight response, like I didn't want to look at the boss to attack it. It was just so deeply unsettling to me on a stimuli level for some reason. Adding on to this was the boss's size and mannerisms. If an enemy was moving and behaving in this way, but was like the same height as the player, it probably wouldn't bother me too much. It would just be kind of like... But to have a malevolent creature of this stature moving this fast and erratically really did send primal shockwaves throughout my brain's threat detectors. I really do feel like it was just kind of an 8-brain fear response to a large creature moving at high speeds in an unpredictable manner, if that makes sense. What's crazy too is that he doesn't even do much to attack you in this phase. The player's goal here is to use their boomerang to cut his strings, rendering his tail bulb vulnerable to attack with a light arrow, and he doesn't offer too much resistance outside of shuffling around the arena, occasionally taking pot shots, and making his strings hard to connect with. But goddammit, I found his animations combined with the music to be so unsettling that I struggled to even do this when I first played through the game. Afterwards, following what seems like a victory, Puppet Ganon will enter 2 additional forms, being a large spider and a snake. And funnily enough, despite being deeply arachnophobic in real life, I didn't struggle too much with his spider form. It was definitely the least visually abrasive stage of the fight for me. I did find his snake form to be somewhat unsettling in a sort of sensory overload kind of way though. The music obviously still goes a long way here, but also being trapped in this tiny, cramped, dark arena with this unstoppable train-like enemy that's literally bouncing off the walls with reckless abandon really did trigger my fight or flight response in the same way as the first form. And what's your payoff for this battle? Oh, only one of the best Ganondorf fights in the series, and the satisfaction of having beaten a damn good Zelda game. I can't really explain why I had such a uniquely petrified response to Puppet Ganon, outside of my 8-brain impulses overreacting to the fight's very unique combination of stimulants, but for what it's worth, I still find it to be kind of unnerving even as I'm working on this video right now a few years later. It's definitely the most that a Zelda boss has ever quote-unquote gotten me, which is crazy when you consider just what kinds of enemies this series has to offer. That shuffle, man. Moving on to a game I've discussed before in the scares context, we have Star Fox 64. Now, I will not mince words here. This game scared the shit out of me as a kid. I think it was the combination of its blocky, low-res art style, the deep space setting, and the overall stakes of the story and gameplay that really rattled me. I talked about it in my childhood trauma video game moments video, but the fake-out easy mode ending against Robot Andross was particularly petrifying to me as a kid. However, as an adult, despite the fact that I view most of the game as very cool and non-scary, there is still one boss who creeps me out just a bit more than I'd like to admit.
The view is clear.
Going through the Sector X mission in Star Fox 64, the player will be told that their plucky band of anthropomorphic fighter pilots will be working towards the goal of destroying a new enemy weapon engineered by the game's main villain, Andross. However, as they navigate through Sector X, things will quickly unveil themselves to be not what they seem, with the research station already being in shambles and its surrounding base very much destroyed. At multiple points, the player can see unexplained, undamageable robot parts flying through the wreckage, causing both the player and the in-game characters to wonder just what could have happened. Luckily, the answer will very quickly reveal itself in the form of the Spyborg.
What the heck? Fox, look behind you! So this is the secret weapon.
Destroy. Destroy.
Now, let me be clear, the Spyborg is not scary on a visual level. It's just the upper half of Rob the Robot from the NES, with its colors darkened and its overall aesthetic being a bit gloomier. Not exactly winning any creep awards on a purely visual basis. However, this thing's audio design, its lore, and the associated nature of its boss fight really creep me out for reasons that I can't really articulate. Basically, the Spyborg was being built by Andross' scientists to be a new robot guardian for his army, one that was equally capable of being intelligent and physically powerful. However, complications with its AI caused it to go insane, destroying the base it was being developed on and causing it to enter an infinite drift through space, endlessly searching for its creator, and longing to be complete. Due to its instability, however, it attacked anything that it could see, rendering it both ironically incompletable and as a target for the Star Fox team. Throughout the boss fight, the Spyborg will speak to the player in its creepy, heavily modulated robotic voice, letting out an equal mix of threats of destruction and desperate pleas to be complete. It's got this kind of intrinsic paradox paradox to its existence, where all it wants is to be finished by its own standards by its creator, yet its violent and unstable nature making it a danger to anyone who comes across it. It's highly likely that it did, in fact, kill its own creator in its rampage, putting itself in this awful fate. What's extra creepy too is that it's implied that the Star Fox team themselves can't actually hear or understand it, with Fox asking what it's saying and Falco simply decrying it as crazy. This adds a sort of weird, eerie, dramatic irony to the fight, where the player is being privy to information that the characters themselves don't have.
Where is the creator?
What's he saying?
Destroy. Destroy.
Destroy what? He's crazy.
The fight is also extra notable for its gameplay and story integration, as after seemingly defeating it, the Spyborg will revive itself with more HP, entering an even madder state and attacking by wildly swinging its arms and throwing loose debris at the player. And it all around feels sort of like the only fight in the game where the Star Fox team isn't in complete control. They're clearly taken off guard by it, and this is further accentuated by the battle's alternate ending, where if you take too long to win, the Spyborg will actually slap Slippy out of the sky, stranding him on a nearby planet and requiring the player to partake in a daring rescue mission to save him. I don't know, the Spyborg is just kind of the perfect mix of stuff in Star Fox 64 to creep me out. Its desperate yet paradoxical need to be complete, its creepy voice, the in-game characters' reactions to it, the multiple gameplay surprises it has in store for new players, the overall frantic and chaotic feel of the fight. This is very much a battle that's seemingly trying to be creepy, and a game that otherwise very much feels like its scares are completely unintentional to me as a kid. This battle is trying to be eerie and make the player uncomfortable, and for me, it definitely succeeds even as an adult. Also, yes, I know the Spyborg is voiced by the same woman who voiced Slippy. You can delete that comment now. Actually, don't. It's good for engagement.
I must be complete.
So surely if Nintendo had any one series that approached horror in its base concept, it'd have to be Metroid, right? Like, out of any Nintendo curated franchise, Metroid has to be the one that's rubbed shoulders with the horror genre the absolute most. Between its often dire story, its alien-inspired monsters and setups, its consistently grim and secluded atmosphere, and the all-around focus on intensity and imparting a dangerous vibe, Metroid surely is Nintendo's most traditionally frightening series. And while some players would very enthusiastically attach the label of scariest Metroid game to Metroid Dread, my heart belongs to a classic. Metroid Fusion is interesting, both because it was my first Metroid game I'd beaten at the time I played it, and because it feels as though it's actively trying to be frightening more so than any other Metroid game from around the same time. You're single-handedly exploring a derelict, wrecked-up space station that's been turned upside down by a near-invincible species of highly adaptable alien parasites. Parasites who can shapeshift into their hosts, control their bodies, adapt to their environments, and even take full control of Samus's iconic power suit, leaving her pretty much helpless as this shambling ghoul with all of her strongest weapons wanders around the station. And while the SAX definitely is spooky, especially on a first playthrough where you don't realize how easy it is to troll, there is another boss in this game that I find to be just a bit more nightmarish. Look, he's literally like the 5th most popular search inquiry when you type Metroid Fusion into YouTube. Did you really expect Nightmare to not be in this video? Nightmare is a spooky boss in Metroid Fusion. Before even getting to the fight, the game is actively planting seeds from the earliest possible moment that this dude is one bad motherfucker. The fittingly named Nightmare is a bioweapon with gravity controlling powers that had been being worked on in secret aboard the BSL station that Fusion is set on prior to the X-Parasite outbreak. Once the outbreak has occurred though, and all of the researchers on the station had been killed and assimilated by the X-Parasites, Nightmare escapes from its containment, floating around the station, destroying everything in its path and generally being a real problem. At multiple points throughout the game, long before you fight it, you can catch glimpses both of Nightmare's destruction and its silhouette in the distance as it just narrowly misses the player. This is gonna sound really silly considering that this is a scripted video game and that you can never actually encounter Nightmare early, but it is indescribably frightening to imagine that at all times while the player is exploring the BSL station, Nightmare is just floating around freely somewhere causing trouble, completely independent of your actions. He's on his own adventure while you're exploring the BSL station. Like, imagine walking walking through an abandoned building, but there's just a monster in it somewhere at all times that you could theoretically bump into at any moment. Every instance that you're not encountering each other is sheer luck and coincidence. Between Adam, Samus's AI assistant, regularly reminding you of how dangerous this thing is, and the slight glimpses you can get of it at certain points in the game, these are legitimate foreshadowing techniques that actual horror media uses. By the time you're actually ready to fight Nightmare, you'll be told by Adam that something serious is going down on the previously explored Sector 5, and that you'd better tread carefully. On your way there, you'll find the area fittingly destroyed before making contact with the Nightmare itself. So, I'm not the only one, right? This guy's fucking scary. The sound design and Foley in this fight are filled with harsh, abrasive mechanical noises, and Fusion's iconic GVA screeching, and Nightmare's design is appropriately freaky. Its emotionless, ever-frowning mask, combined with its size and hunched posture, give the impression of an intrinsically malicious creature, and its abilities to both control gravity and attack with its own defenses make it feel like an insurmountable foe. Doesn't help that this fight is really hard on the first playthrough. The arena you fight it in is basically microscopic for an enemy of Nightmare's size, requiring the player to get up close and personal and actively rub shoulders of the beast to damage it. But it's okay, once you destroy its gravity manipulator, the fight should be Ah yeah, the real reason everyone talks about this boss. Yeah, after you enter Nightmare's second phase, its mask, which had previously been oozing green slime, will break, revealing its horrific, literally melting goop-like face. After blasting it a bit, it'll deteriorate even further, eventually reaching a point of literally dripping down the creature's head frame and all around just being really gross. This has gotta be gore of someone's comfort character, right? And after you defeat it, you've still gotta fight its ex-parasite too, which is pretty standard for bosses in this game, but is extra noteworthy in Nightmare's case due to how legitimately difficult and menacing it is just on its own merits. This boss would be creepy at the least without the presence of a near indestructible parasite controlling it. The addition of an X inside of it really is the icing on this green melty cake. What would this thing be capable of without an X-parasite puppeteering it? This entire fight is just such a bizarre thing to exist in a Nintendo game, because let's not mince words here, this is a horror game boss. Like the foreshadowing, the design, the name, the mechanics, the size of the room, the grisly visuals, this is all stuff that like actual real horror games do to impart fear in the player. And it's all stuffed into a cartridge on the same console that little Jimmy uses to play Pokemon Emerald and the Drake and Josh game. Part of what makes Nightmare such an effectively creepy boss is just how surprising its sheer existence is. Metroid Fusion has been a creepy game up to this point, but this is arguably its most direct attempt at truly weaponizing horror game tropes in its boss design. Okay, well, this and the SAX. Also, Nightmare is in Metroid Other M, and he screams like a baby in that game. I'll honestly take it over the melting face. So, how many of y'all have seen my Wario World retrospective? My voice is a little more messed up than usual in it due to me just having recovered from an illness while recording it, but in general, I think it's one of my better retrospectives. One thing I really went out of my way to touch on in it was just how weirdly creepy and abstract Wario World is as a game, especially in regards to its boss design. These things are crazy for a Nintendo game, featuring visuals and audio that are legitimately uncomfortable to perceive at certain points. They look weird, they sound weird, their fights are often frantic and high energy. It's all around one of the most memorable yet jarring things about Wario World. A lot of people seem to believe that enemies like the Brawl Doll, a large living baby doll with a spinning head, or the Clown Around, a clown demon with a removable face, are the creepiest bosses in the game. And to that I say, you'll need to play a few more levels, because Wario World's true creepiest boss is one who's rarely talked about online, yet will immediately imprint itself on your fragile psyche once you first fight it. We are in the cold months after all. Holy hell, is the Winter Winster one creepy son of a bitch. This enemy is fought as the boss of Wario World's resident snow level, and as I mentioned a second or so ago, it will immediately become unforgettable once you've fought it for the first time. As you'd expect, its design combined with its music definitely impart a very uncomfortable feel, with its giant head, rosy complexion, wild hair, disinterested facial expression, and jarringly tiny body already making it kind of abrasive visually, and the booming music clashing heavily with its design definitely doesn't help, yet the real creepiness begins when you start the actual fight. The Winter Winster's fight has a very odd vibe. The boss itself, despite its eerie appearance, barely seems to take much notice of Wario, just kind of floating around in relative disinterest while taking slow, easily avoidable pot shots at him and occasionally trying to freeze him. It's hard to explain, especially for a game this abstract, but it sort of feels as though Wario barely registers as a mild inconvenience to the Winster. Like the boss is secretly capable of much more than it's letting on. If it does manage to freeze you though, it'll jump scare you by landing and fucking sprinting full tilt at you, which combined with its design and otherwise very lackadaisical battle pace really fucking gets you the first time. It moves really fast pretty much anytime it's on the ground, which makes the whole battle feel pretty unpredictable. Now, none of that is that bad. It's visually unpleasant and kind of eerie, sure, but nothing that's outwardly creepy. However, this boss's super move, its Kingdom Hearts-ass DM, was so shocking to me when I reviewed the game that I made sure to use it as B-roll at one point. During the level leading up to the Winster, you'll be told by one of the rescued spritelings not to look directly into its red eyes, and you might not immediately realize what this means when you get around to fighting it, as its eyes are probably its least noteworthy visual aspect, but then...
What the fuck? What the fuck?
They put this in a game with a Mario character on the box. Genuinely, completely removed from any modern context that might be associated with an attack like this. I found this to be so shocking when I first played through the game. The Winter Winster will slowly hover around, flashing its glowing red eyes at the player, while the music swells and nearby fire geysers erupt, all while the camera angle shifts specifically to focus on it, and if you turn Wario to look at it, you'll get fucking inflated as he dives down your throat. They showed this to kids, and I know that Nintendo has no way of knowing that this kind of stuff would go on to be like appreciated by niche internet circles later down the line, but even still, I find the overall intensity, bizarreness, and shock factor of this attack to just be a step beyond literally everything else that's present in this game. You fight a dinosaur in a bikini and a pig in a Speedo in this game, and this is the most shocking thing that happens. This whole fight feels that way, like it's just one step beyond everything else in the rest of this game. Like if we're talking about weird, creepy, abstract stuff, then a normal Mario game is like a 2 out of 10. Wario World in general is a 7 out of 10, and this fight is like an 8 or 9. It feels the most divorced from this game's tangential association with Mario out of anything else it has to offer. Wario World was not developed by Nintendo, but rather Treasure, and this is strange even by their standards. There's really not much else to say about this boss. It's just so unpleasant and shocking on a first-time playthrough when you don't know it's coming that I knew I had to talk about it here based on my initial reaction from when I played it for my retrospective. I don't think the Winter Winster is terrifying or anything, but I just think about all the kids who played this thing in the early 2000s and how they would have reacted to and rationalized this fight. From the design to the vibes to the DM, this is just a step too far into weird territory for even a game like Wario World. And as always, it barely registers to Wario himself. Man's got money and murder on his mind. But, to quote regular Pat quoting Zexion in Kingdom Hearts 358 over 2 days, surely you must have known this was going to happen. When discussing bosses in Nintendo games that may be frightening, creepy, or shocking to a first-time player, there really isn't a better option than the most obvious one. We all know about this thing. Even if you haven't played the game it's from, you've assuredly seen or heard it talked about at some point. The mangled, indecipherable red cosmic maw that hangs over every discussion of creepy enemies in video games. It hurts, but I'm happy. Let's talk about Giygas. So, full disclosure, I don't care one bit about any of the pregnancy or fetus or baby theories associated with this final boss from Earthbound. I think there's merit to it on a discussion level, but I also think that for our purposes, Giygas has enough scary shit going on in the actual text of the game that we don't need to dwell on that. Because, make no mistake, Earthbound lets you know that this dude is a problem from moment one. You start the game for the first time, and the first thing you see is this. The plot of Earthbound sees the main character Ness and his merry band of child allies being tasked by Buzz, a warrior from a destroyed future, with stopping the impending invasion and universal destruction that's being planned by the enigmatic Giygas, an alien creature that's not seen or very well understood until the end of the game, yet whose influence can be felt all throughout it. It's known as the Universal Cosmic Destroyer and the embodiment of evil, a creature whose very presence and existence warps reality and the lives of those around it to fit its whims. All of those funny Earthbound enemies, those living signs and cranky old ladies and funny dogs, those are, in reality, normal everyday creatures and people that have been unknowingly corrupted by Giygas' influence. Through sheerly existing, Giygas plants the seeds of evil in those around it. Every enemy encountered in Earthbound is, to some degree, an extension of Giygas' self and influence. By the time the players made it to the endgame, they've learned that Giygas had previously consulted the predictive Apple of Enlightenment to learn of its future, and was told that it'd be destroyed by a young boy and his 3 friends. Terrified of this eventuality, Giygas shed any remaining thought and entered a form of pure hatred with the sole intention of invading Ness's world and preventing the prediction from coming to pass. On top of being indescribably powerful, Giygas can also not think, reason, or even present a corporeal form. It exists solely to destroy. Eventually, Ness and his friends learn of Giygas' location in the Cave of the Past, which can't be accessed in a human body. Shedding their skin in favor of robot suits, Ness and crew travel back in time to confront Giygas, traversing a fleshy, sinewy path and dealing with the strongest enemies of their journey, only to be greeted by longtime enemy Pokey Minch and the enigmatic Devil's Machine. Pokey taunts the player as they battle, telling them that Giygas' true form is beyond words and truly horrific. And then, after being backed into a corner, he disables the Devil's Machine, keeping Giygas at bay, releasing it to fight on its own. True to Pokey's word, Giygas is visually indescribable. A twisted, contorted, anguished red swirl that consumes the entire space around it. Giygas speaks to the player in fractured, incomprehensible sentence fragments, its words ranging from desperate pleas to pained cries to exclamations of pleasure. Its attacks are indecipherable. You're only told that you cannot grasp the true form of Giygas' attacks. It's also virtually invincible, taking no lasting damage from attacks, yet being viscerally put upon by the prayers and well wishes of its opponents, the people, and the player. It begins to collapse more and more as the battle wears on, losing its mind and form in equal measure as the prayers of the world it intends to destroy push back against it. Eventually, after a lengthy, arduous, and horrific ordeal, which sees this creature taking on various equally twisted forms, the prayers overwhelm Giygas, and it falls without knowing what had even happened to it. Whatever it was thinking, and whatever it was doing at any given moment did not matter. Its sole single-minded goal was destruction and harm. It did not care, rationalize, or believe. It did not even have a form to call its own. It knew only destruction. Because don't forget, Giygas was not an evil mastermind, a monster, or even a character in Earthbound. It was the embodiment of evil itself. A being that not only existed to hate itself, but also corrupted and manipulated those who were unfortunate enough to occupy space with it into carrying out its own warped goals. A being of indescribable power that could not think or act beyond primal instinct. The Universal Cosmic Destroyer. So yeah, Giygas is really fucking scary. I played Earthbound for the first time when I was 24, knowing full well what Giygas was and what it looked and sounded like, and it still creeped the hell out of me. This guy is in a game whose protagonist shares space in Super Smash Bros. With Mario and Pikachu. Earthbound is not a kid's game. Despite being made by Nintendo and having colorful graphics, there's a reason that it received a T rating when it was re-released. That reason is Giygas. He is, without a shadow of a doubt, the scariest thing ever put in a Nintendo game for any age group. Even if you've consumed every think piece about him before fighting him in the game, the experience of being locked in battle with him is otherworldly in terms of the emotions it imparts. Your screen being nothing but its twisted face, your audio being only its creepy music, actually being in the fight really gets to you. It's really goddamn scary, and I'm happy to admit that at the age of 26. The scariest thing a game can do to you is defy your expectations, and Giygas most certainly does that. So, there you have it. That's the video. I don't really know what to expect from the comments on this one. I just thought this would be a fun subversion of the old childhood trauma conversation that every YouTuber has had at some point. So if you're brave enough, share some bosses and games that scare you as an adult. If you're extra brave, they might even be from Nintendo games. Either way, thanks. Hope you all had a fantastic day before, during, and after watching, and I'll catch you all later. Cheers!